So good, so good, so good.
Great gifts for mom? We've got them. And they're up to 60% off at Nordstrom Rack stores now.
You know they have Marc Jacobs?
Gotta show mom some love.
That is so good.
Snag amazing deals on Mother's Day gifts from Barefoot Dreams, Kate Spade New York, and more. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip. When it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Always look to the sky. The Dr. Sky Experience is on the air. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
And good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good evening. Wherever you're listening to us, broadcasting from the center of the universe, New York City, with its 8.3 million people, and I'm sure 36 million opinions, which we like. How about this? A density of 29,302 people per square mile. And the powerhouse of this radio station moves out to the U.S. population, some 341,508,000 people, and growing by 4 births a minute. But I'm sure, and I'm sure many of you would agree, that this particular radio station and sound is moving out into the cosmos. Welcome to the Dr. Sky Experience here on 77 WABC. Your questions and comments are most important to us. The caller line, 1-800-848-9222. That's 1-800-848-9222. Get in early, and we do our very best to get you and your questions and comments on the air. But a special shout-out to our producer, Tony, who is navigating this powerhouse radio starship to you, to worlds, I'm sure, even unknown. What do we talk about on the Dr. Sky Experience? The mysteries of the universe with the realms of astronomy, space, aviation, weather, along with stories of American exceptionalism and stories from our Constitution, Bill of Rights, and so much more. And how about celebrity guests in the mix? And this morning, ladies and gentlemen, a very special series of programs and guests on the Dr. Sky Experience. That number, once again, get in early, 1-800-848-9222. In our first hour, we'll be introducing a friend of mine, an astronomer who's observed the heavens for many, many years, discovering so many of those interlopers that go out there in the solar system and in the universe, what we call simply as asteroids. But get set in the second hour for a whole change of thought. We've all been hearing this week about President Trump releasing new information about the background of the Kennedy assassination. I'm sure many of you out there are wondering, will we ever hear the truth about this particular story? And a special guest, his name is Todd C. Elliott, a very different twist on the theories of the Kennedy assassination as we move into our second hour. And we're asking you to stand by, of course. Why would you change the channel? A book that he's written, we've talked about it before in other shows that I've had here and around the country. The name of the book arose by many other names, The Story of Rose Cherami. But ladies and gentlemen, you now heard about the astronauts returning on the Starliner. You've heard that, of course, now they're back here on the Earth, going through some series of medical tests to acclimate back, I should say, to the gravity of the Earth. And we wish them well. They'll be visiting President Trump in the Oval Office, I'm sure, to talk about that particular event, the long-duration visit in space. Imagine spending as if you would go to a hotel and spend 10 days and be locked in your room for 286 days. So much more about that. But if you think about the things that go on in the night sky at night, and so many things to talk about, but first, let me remind the listeners right now of 77 WABC about a special event that's happening this coming Saturday morning that we'll, of course, be able to see, I should say, next week, the 29th to be more precise, March the 29th. There'll be a tiny solar eclipse that's visible from the New York area in the northeast, from, let's say, Boston all the way down to Philadelphia. As the sun would rise in New York City on the 29th, that Saturday morning at 6:45 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, we will get to see a 27% coverage, that is, of the sun as it's rising, a beautiful sight, but make sure you have those safe solar glasses. The whole event is over by 7:05. A rare partial eclipse visible much more in the areas of Canada and up toward the North Pole. And we can take your questions about that in greater detail. But so many people out there were concerned about asteroids, at least something that we heard about in the mainstream news, about an asteroid known as 2024 YR4. And then originally we heard that the asteroid had a small but ever-growing percentile of maybe that it would strike the Earth in the year 2032. But all those fears are now seemingly dismissed as astronomers tell us that there's probably a zero chance of that. But who knows better about these different things? This hour we'll discuss with a very special guest and a friend of mine, astronomer Jim Scotty. He was born in 1960 in Bandon, Oregon. He watched the Apollo moon landings and became very interested in the sky and what was overhead, which led him to a serious interest in astronomy. He studied astronomy at the University of Arizona and has been working on the Spacewatch project since 1982, observing and discovering asteroids and comets ever since. And to the credit of Spacewatch in southern Arizona at a beautiful remote mountain known as Kitt Peak, they've discovered at least well over 179,000 asteroidal bodies that are moving out through the solar system. And one of them that they discovered was also the direction of a spacecraft called DART, an interesting asteroid, which we'll get into a discussion with our special guest in just a moment, the asteroid known as Didymos. With that, I'd like to welcome our special guest of the first hour here of our very interesting program that you folks tell us that you like so much, the Dr. Sky Experience. Jim, welcome, and thank you for joining us here on this program.
Thanks for having me.
It's a privilege and honor, my friend. I haven't talked to you in quite a while. So tell us a little bit more. What goes on there? Because obviously you must have a very loving wife, because during the time when the moon is not in the sky, I imagine you and your fellow astronomers are observing for these objects that go, deep into the dark of the night, and we need to know about. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I've been working with the Spacewatch project since, like you said, 1982, and I started out working on computer programs to detect and discover asteroids with electronic cameras. Before about that time, most of the asteroid observations were done with film, so people had to actually blink images and measure them analytically instead. And I wrote the very first asteroid detection software, automatic asteroid detection software around that time, and it's evolved considerably, and other observers are now doing most of the discoveries. We're concentrating on following up asteroid discoveries to improve our knowledge of their orbits over time. So when an object like YR4 is discovered, we're one of the observers who will go out to observe it, so we can nail down its orbit and project, be able to predict where in the future it'll be, and see if it might hit the Earth someday.
Wow. So, well, let's hope not, Jim, because I know there's so many stories in the past of known asteroidal bodies that have struck the Earth. And, just to calm people out there in the dark of night, wherever you're listening to us, that here's a man, ladies and gentlemen, that I've come to know over the years. And it's interesting because when you spend that time up there, Jim, nobody could claim that there's a dull moment up there. I mean, many people may think, wow, how can they spend all that time in a lonely observatory somewhere? But no, you're very busy doing this. And the detection process, you described the detection software. That's kind of very interesting. That's way above most people's, pay grade, obviously. And we're happy to have you to talk about it. So what's the excitement? What was your first asteroidal body before we have, go out and define what these objects are, just in case listeners have no idea? And if you have questions for our special guest, Jim Scotty, jump in on the caller line. It's 1-800-848-9222, which of course stands for 1-848. WABC, 1-800-848-WABC, that's 9222. What was it like to discover something like that? I mean, you go in the Hall of Fame like people like William Herschel, who discovered the planet Uranus, and Tombaugh, who discovered Pluto right here in Arizona. Well, what's it like? I mean, that must be an exciting feeling.
Well, in the earliest days, nobody had ever discovered asteroids that way before, so seeing one, we actually spent a lot of time just observing known asteroids so we could learn how to measure their position on the sky and project where they'd be going into the future. And and all that, all that kind of stuff. But I remember, I think it was 1989 when we were starting to actually survey at the telescope, as well as just following up asteroids, where we found our first near-Earth asteroid. And it was pretty exciting. When you first see the object, you don't really know what it really is. Most often, the asteroids you see are all out in the main belt, sort of, you might call them boring old asteroids. But occasionally you'll see that one that's moving a little faster or in a different direction, and be able to, once you get enough observations, be able to estimate what its orbit actually is and recognize the object as a potential Earth-crossing asteroid that might hit the Earth someday.
That's interesting. No, this is a fascinating subject, Jim, because now, here, again, I jump all over this because I think, and I'm trying to say this in a nice, polite way, of course, I could get a little more energized, and maybe you too. I mean, the feeling is, in my opinion, there's so many of these reports that come out every week. An asteroid the size of the Eiffel Tower is passing by the Earth, or maybe they don't just say passing. They leave that in the back of your mind that, well, maybe this thing is going to hit us. And then the most ridiculous thing I heard, and it's absolutely stupid, but I'll have to say it here, and don't hold me to this, folks out there, that they discovered an asteroid 4 to 5 times the height of Taylor Swift. I mean, come on, get real. That's the most absurd thing. It could be they discovered an asteroid 4 times the size of Jim Scotty or Steve Cates and Dr. Sky, but the point I'm taking is kind of a bizarre. What do you think about that? Do you think, in all honesty, the news media does this in a way that kind of is more of an alarmist thing, or what's the story from an astronomer's perspective?
Well, a lot of the time you hear about an object that passed within the distance to the moon, or 1 million kilometers, which is 4 times the distance to the moon. But they usually don't mention that it was only 22 meters across or something like that. And an object like that will put on a really good show up in the sky, but most of the time it'll burn up high up in the atmosphere, and it'll just be a meteor. But sometimes they're a little bigger, and 50,000 years ago, I wasn't around then, there was an object that came in over Arizona. Yes. It was about 50 meters or so across, and was probably a nickel iron asteroid, so it was a harder object, and it made it all the way to the ground and created Meteor Crater, which is a fairly spectacular place to go visit.
Well, let's mention to the listeners out there, Jim, that people need to see this. If they have not seen the Meteor Crater in Arizona, I think it's a good reason to join there. And maybe in another iteration, when we have you as a guest, we can talk about the Apollo astronaut and other astronaut training ground right there in the Flagstaff area for the moon missions, which is fascinating. But you know what? On this radio show, folks, the callers really rule here. And let's do this, and let's go to Jim. Let's talk with Jim about something and have him answer some questions. Let's go to Patrick in Brooklyn, if you're with us. Good morning, Patrick. Thank you for joining us on this particular edition of our radio show, The Dr. Sky Experience. Good morning. Patrick, are you with us? Yeah.
I can just barely hear him.
Okay, we'll have to do that some other time because we're hearing you on a speakerphone. But, Jim, let's identify to the audience out there. I mean, average people like ourselves may not really understand what the heck is an asteroid. And before you answer, it's not playing iterations of the old asteroid game that many people thought out there was the coolest thing in the world. And I know friends of mine have, copies in their basement, in their man or woman cave of the old asteroid game. But being serious, what are these objects in space? How do we define them?
Yeah. Well, asteroids and comets, I really put them all sort of in the same little category or subcategory. They're the remnants of the formation of the solar system, and they can be little tiny objects, the size of a grain of sand, or they can be a boulder like the Tunguska fireball or the impact crater, the one that made the impact crater in northern Arizona, yes. Or eventually you get into bigger and bigger objects. But we can actually count the number of objects we see and make estimates of how many are actually out there, and that helps us establish what the likelihood of an impact on Earth is. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, they hit us all the time, but most of them are little death specks that aren't going to hurt anyone on the ground. It might hurt a spacecraft, so you got to keep that in mind a little bit too. But they're basically the remains of the building blocks that created the planets. A lot of them, they accreted into smaller objects that are, boulder-sized or house-sized or bigger, all the way up to Mars-sized or Earth-sized or Jupiter-sized.
That's incredible, Jim. When I was a young boy, as many listeners in the New York metro area knew of the Hayden Planetarium, and they still do know it, even by a different name. And I remember walking in there seeing this gigantic piece of metal that was pockmarked everywhere. And that thing impressed me because I was thinking, wow, that thing was probably what, Jim? A lot larger before it actually was recovered. And that in itself was what? Probably the one we're talking about, some kind of a nickel iron piece of a remnant of something from space, right?
Yeah. A lot of the meteorite falls actually is the result of an object that enters the atmosphere and then breaks up high up in the atmosphere. So instead of getting the big piece that was maybe 10 meters across, you might get 50 pieces that are a few centimeters or a meter across that fall out of the sky and get picked up by meteorite hunters and things like that. So it's pretty interesting. We can learn from what we find about what our solar system is made of and how the Earth formed 4.5 billion years ago. And it's fun to look beyond just the fact that you found a meteor or saw a asteroid up in the sky or a planet or whatever.
Well, a rare opportunity, folks, to get to talk to somebody who not only discovers these, but knows a heck of a lot about them. And before we go into apocalyptic scenarios, which we really don't want to do, or the study of eschatology, the end of times, we want you to give us a call because the callers rule. 1-800-848-9222. That's 1-800-848-9222. We'll be happy to take your calls as time permits here. But, Jim, here's something else. Let's go to the political and legal side of asteroids. And people may go, what the heck is he talking about here? What's Dr. Sky saying? Here it is. You see something come out of the sky. It lands somewhere on the ground. And I'm not being too definitive in my location here. Who owns what, and how do you claim, if it's on your property, I would hope that you own it. But what's the story behind that? Because I've heard lots of different answers to this. What say you?
I'm not too worried about that kind of thing, but okay. If you find go out, say you see a big bright fireball some night. I remember there was one near Tucson probably 20 years ago now. It doesn't seem like that long ago, but it made a really bright fireball and left you could see the trail up in the sky for a while after it had entered. But we immediately started thinking, well, there must be meteorites from that. So it was so bright. So a lot of people went hunting for meteorites, including me, and I found a lot of good rocks, but I didn't see any meteorites. And I'm not a meteorite hunter. I'm a meteoroid hunter.
There you go.
Up in the sky.
What comes through the heavens?
When you pick up a meteorite and you're a geologist, you can recognize them for what they are and know that they're pieces of an asteroid or a meteor that had entered the atmosphere at some point. And you can put it in your collection. And but that's a whole nother
no, absolutely.
I'm interested in them when there's still points of light up in the sky far away, long before they might hit us.
Well, the reason I mention that, Jim, is there have been people out there who've actually fought in court over this particular thing. And without naming a person, I understand there was a gentleman, I think, from the Tucson area that was one who'd go all over the world to grab these different asteroidal bodies or there were meteoroids or meteorites on the ground. And he was actually arrested in Africa or something, and I'll leave his name out there because that wouldn't be fair to him. But this is very fascinating, too. When you look at this, I want to bring up something here. We're almost coming up on a break here in a little while. And we do appreciate everybody who's standing by to get on here because this is a rare opportunity, as I mentioned. You're the discoverer of something, and I want you to pronounce the name properly, of probably one of the only asteroids in the solar system that has a ring system. Am I correct on this? That's bizarre. What is that?
I don't remember that one.
Yeah, I think it's called Chariklo or something like that. That's what it says. Yeah, Chariklo.
Yeah, I didn't name it. I didn't name that asteroid, but I don't remember the details of its discovery. I found so many of them over the years. They all sort of blend together in a lot of ways.
Fair enough.
But
well, let's go to Paul in Connecticut. Paul has a question here, and good morning, Paul. Welcome to our Dr. Sky Experience. And we appreciate your time. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Oh, pretty good, hanging in here. I saw a meteorite go past, fly by me one night, and it was as big as a Cadillac, the old Cadillacs.
Right.
The big, and it was flying fast. So I'm trying to wonder about the speed that they're coming in at. It was faster than the Blue Angels, fighter jets, everything.
I'm sure they were. Jim, take that one because that's a good question there. We appreciate, Paul, what you're asking.
Yeah. When an object hits the Earth, it's falling from essentially infinity, although it's not that far. But so it comes in at a minimum speed of the escape velocity of the Earth. Without any help from its original orbit. It goes faster if it's, of course, because it's not just dropping from infinity like a rock drop from your hand to the ground, but it's being dropped from much farther away.
Pretty
so
exciting.
It comes in at a very high speed, 25,000 miles an hour is escape velocity. Plus, it has some of its original speed to add to that. So, yeah.
Well, Paul, that's interesting because at least he didn't say, and he's a scientist, that it wasn't 4 times the size of, as you described, when you're talking about a Cadillac, 4 times the size of Taylor Swift there. But we appreciate your call and hope you'll stay with us and continue to call us from time to time as we explore the, boundaries of the universe with great information, as we believe, from the realms of astronomy, space, aviation, and weather. And let's try to squeeze in one more call before we go to the break at the hard bottom of the hour. Let's say good morning to Al in New York. Al, good morning. How are you this morning?
Hey, Dr. Sky, how you doing?
Doing well, sir. How are you?
Excellent show. That meteorite was brought in by Eskimos in Greenland, and they actually lived at the Museum of Natural History for years, and most of them died. They got very, very sick. And another thing I want to say was, 2 things real quick. This is about you personally, possibly, a question. My mom used to work many, many years ago at a place called Mary Immaculate, and also I used to go to school in Jackson Heights. Are you from that area, and what do you miss most from New York?
Well, as much as I'd love to talk about myself, I can just tell you really quickly. I was born in Mary Immaculate Hospital in Jamaica, and we did live in and live there for a short period during the World's Fair in Jackson Heights. But Al, let me jump over to go ahead and have Jim respond back on these things because that's amazing. I didn't know that if that's correct that it came from Greenland, a big meteorite that's sitting in the Hayden Planetarium of days gone by?
The one I saw in the Museum of Natural History, very huge, about a yard and a half wide.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Jim, you want to comment on that? I mean, I don't know much more about it other than it was pretty impressive when I saw it.
Yeah, do you know anything about the Russian, what do they call that, Tonga event?
Tunguska?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. I'm not as much into meteorites themselves, but so I can only sort of arm wave a little bit here. But there are a lot of meteorite falls all the time, and a lot of meteorites in museums and things like that. I used to work at the Flandre Planetarium as a student at the University of Arizona, and we had the Tucson Ring meteorite, which was actually found in the mountains south of Tucson, and had been put on display. It was displayed in various museums as well. So, there's a lot of different kinds of meteorites. The ones that are most likely to survive are the nickel iron, the hard ones, and most of the other smaller things or less strong things tend to burn up in the atmosphere, so you only get dust in the upper atmosphere that slowly settles onto Earth. Remember that the Earth really formed out of meteorite material.
Yes.
The stuff that was orbiting around the sun at the time and accreted into the planets that we live on and see today.
It's fascinating. Thanks, Al. I appreciate your time and hope obviously you'll be part of our team as we journey out to the outer reaches of the universe here, bringing you the best guests we can find. And believe me, there's many of them like our special guest tonight and this morning, Jim Scotty in Arizona, right where I am here in Phoenix, Arizona. And again, lots of things happening in our skies, beautiful things that are going to occur here in the world of astronomy and space. And we're going to continue here, ladies and gentlemen, to the bottom of the hour. And then in this next half hour to the top of the next hour, as we move into your morning, we welcome you to our Saturday morning program here. And still on the west coast of the United States, obviously still Friday evening. We thank you for joining us here. And, of course, you can check out the Dr. Sky Experience podcast right here at WABCRadio.com. And that, of course, has lots of information there, not just in these realms, but many, many things. We like to talk about rock and roll bands. We have a brand new interview with the lead guitarist and singer of the band called Foghat, which is coming out here and has traveled all over and will be coming into the New York area, I'm sure, because the roots of Foghat also go back to the New York area. Quite interesting, ladies and gentlemen. Well, we're coming up on that break here as the bottom of the hour, and when we come back, more with our very special guest, Jim Scotty, an astronomer who's discovered so many of these objects, and we'll even ask him, how does one get to get a named asteroid after them? Though that Jim's probably not ready to write your name down at any point in time in this show, but there's so many things that we'll be discussing here. Thank you for being with us, ladies and gentlemen, on this excursion as we talk about from the great realms of astronomy, space, aviation, and weather. And a big shout-out and thank you to owner-operator John Katsimatidis and family, and to the executive staff, to Chad Lopez, and all that make this radio station the big, powerful starship, as you're hearing it wherever you're listening to, the power of 77 WABC. We'll be right back.
At Capella University, you can learn at your own pace with our FlexPath learning format. Take 1 or 2 courses at a time and complete as many as you can in a 12-week billing session. With FlexPath, you can even finish the bachelor's degree you started in 22 months for $20,000. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu. Fastest 25% of students. Cost varies by pace, transfer credits, and other factors. Fees apply.
Always look to the sky. The Dr. Sky Experience is on the air. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
Well, back at it, ladies and gentlemen, 31 minutes after the hour as we move through time and space. If you're just joining us right now, a very special guest and a friend of mine. I've known him for many years, Jim Scotty, an astronomer who not only talks the talk, but he's the discoverer of so many objects we call asteroids, and so much information here. And again, if you'd like to join the conversation, this radio show, as we know for all the things that we talk about, is molded around you, the listener. 1-800-848-9222. And we're going to try our very best to get into many questions that you might have. So let's say right now, I believe we have Sherilyn calling us from Ontario, Canada. Good morning, Sherilyn. How are you today?
Good morning. What my question is I was listening to Quirks and Quirks here this past Saturday, and an astronomer called in to Bob McDonald. He was talking about all of the junk, the satellites and all the junk that's up in space.
Yes.
And the issues that they're causing and what's more they're going to cause. And I was wondering, you're talking about these asteroids, is there any chance that all this junk could create some of them getting loose and coming to Earth more so than what they would?
Well, I think that's a good question, Jim. I mean, what would you say to Sherilyn up in Canada? I'm sure it's hopefully clear skies for you there, but her question regards this particular
clear skies,
abundance.
and it's supposed to snow tomorrow.
Well, take a peek through the snowflakes, right? There you go.
Yeah.
Jim, what would you say? I mean, this is interesting. It may not be the perfect area that you're talking about with asteroids, but I think, in my opinion, we do have an issue with overabundance. And how does that affect, I mean, from your department, when you do the imaging of objects in the space, aren't these spacecraft and satellites imaging and photobombing a lot of your tracking of these interlopers, asteroids?
Yeah, the Earth-orbiting satellites are definitely a bit of an issue, but they move much faster than the asteroids we're looking for, since they're only a few hundred miles above your head up there. So we can recognize them for what they are. Although occasionally, if you had, say, a meteoroid that was, a few tens of meters across or something that was passing very close to the Earth, it actually would move faster than the satellites. But you can sort of recognize them by their motion and be able to figure out whether it was in an Earth orbit, like a satellite, or a meteoroid that is just flying past the Earth at a much higher speed. So, the satellites do get in the way quite a bit, but we've learned to live with that and recognize them and not have to worry too much about them.
Well, Sherilyn, if you're still with us, I wanted to add something, and Jim is, of course, talking about this. There's something called a Kessler phenomenon or effect, and what's that? If a couple of these satellites all hit each other like billiard balls on a pool table, you'd have a cascading event. I'm not trying to alarm people, But it could be, this aerospace engineer talked about that and said the more you have up there, if you don't keep them a distance apart. But let's hope that doesn't happen, Sherilyn. And any other question or comment you wanted to make before we move forward?
Well, the only other question I've got, or I was going to call another night, but I could bring it up, is do you remember when Chris Hadfield was up in the space station?
I do.
Okay, when he came down and he was discussing different things, he said that whenever all these countries like India, China, United States, all the different countries heading up into space, he says space can never be set up like it is this world. He says you can't have this area belongs to India, this area belongs to Russia, this area belongs to someone else. He said everybody's going to have to get along and be in one space up there. He said there's no way it can be set up like the Earth.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And I think the more we get above the Earth, I think people get real philosophic. I mean, look at these astronauts that were up in space and not stranded, as we say, Sherilyn. That was a misnomer, I think. They were there. They knew what they were going to do. But I want to say thank you. I hope you'll join us in future iterations of our program.
Yes, I really appreciate this show. I just was cleaning up dishes in the kitchen and have it on, and I thought, great.
Well, a shout out, Sherilyn, to all our Canadian friends, regardless of what's going on here, back and forth. Let's hope that we'll all shake hands and get along, all right? There you go. Thank you for calling. Jim, let's talk a little bit more about the special things that you do there. I mean, here we are listening to you, and like I mentioned before, you must have a very loving and understanding wife when you go up there. How long do you go up there during the moon time when it's not visible because you don't see the asteroids as good when there's a full moon? How long are you up there?
I'm usually up there close to 6 nights a month.
Wow.
Sometimes 2-3 night runs instead of one long run or something. And we use not only our own telescopes, but we use a couple of other telescopes occasionally, like the 90-inch telescope that is run by Stewart Observatory at the University of Arizona.
I'm jealous.
We get some amount of time with them as well. Yeah. So yeah, we keep ourselves busy, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Did you hear that, ladies and gentlemen? 90-inch telescope. I mean, I'm working with a 6 or an 8 and a 16-inch, and one of these mornings we'll get into this, ladies and gentlemen, about the different types of telescopes out there because your questions are so important to us. What are we doing here? We're trying to educate everybody about the great mysteries that go on in the universe and bring you the best people that we can, friends and other scientists and experts in their field to help settle in, not settle scores, but to talk about these particular subjects. But Jim, as we continue here, as we move into time and space, let's talk a little bit about these objects that now we call asteroids out there. There are so many groups, time wouldn't permit us to talk about this, but within the asteroid groups, describe some of these to us so people can understand. There are things called Trojans, near-Earth asteroids, Centaurs, Amors, Apollos, Atens. What does all that stuff mean? Is it all based on the distance they are from us or the distance they are from the sun? Tell us more.
Well, we when we find an asteroid, we try to measure it for some amount of time before it maybe gets too faint or something like that, depending on what kind of an asteroid it is. And we can determine the asteroid's orbit around the sun. Most of the asteroids are out in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, and we aren't as interested in them directly, although they're interesting to study from a more scientific point of view to find out, how the solar system formed and what's gone on since. Yes. But we're also looking for the ones that have Earth-crossing orbits that might hit the Earth someday. But then there's also objects that orbit out beyond Neptune. We discovered a long time ago, like 30 years ago now, one of the early good-sized asteroids that orbit out beyond Neptune, and we sort of learned that there's almost a group or a belt of asteroids out there as well that we're just barely able to see. They're so far away, and maybe understand how they formed. Maybe the asteroids tell us something about probably how the solar system formed and how it's evolved since then, and how the solar system would have created the planets that we see out there. So it's a lot of things to learn by studying the asteroids and comets.
Well, Jim, in this particular hour, I wanted to get to one that I'm sure everybody's heard about, the Apophis asteroid, that not allegedly, will come by the Earth in April of 2029, and all kinds of stories I've heard. So here, you have the floor. Tell us about Apophis. What is it? Why is it so important to us? And what is probably going to happen from an astronomer's perspective?
Actually, I haven't paid too much attention to Apophis.
Really?
It's an object that can come close to the Earth like lots of other asteroids. Mm-hmm. So it's just one of many that are sort of in the background. And we have been able to observe it and measure its orbit and predict that it will make a relatively close approach to the Earth on a future date. It won't hit us, at least not then anyway. Maybe, 100 years from now or something, who knows. Yes. So we're using those kinds of asteroids to understand our place in the solar system and what we might see in terms of objects coming close to the Earth or hitting the Earth in the future. So we're just trying to learn what there is out there.
Right. Not to have you become the tar and feathered guy who, after this program's over, if we ask this question, is there anything coming down that highway? From your perspective, not to sound alarmist, but just to tell us, is there anything that we're not hearing from the perspective of astronomers that you could add light on? Or if there's nothing, the same question would go to whatever answer you give us. What about that?
Well, I'm certain there are objects out there that will hit the Earth someday. But there are objects that we know of that are going to make predictable close approaches, like the object you mentioned earlier, 2024 YR4,
right,
which made a close approach, was discovered, and we've tracked it, and there was a small chance it might have hit us during its current close approach, but it'll be back in a few years and make another close approach, and who knows, maybe 100 years from now it might hit the Earth. And by then we'll probably have been observing it well enough that we'll know exactly when and where and probably be able to go out and take Bruce Willis with us and go collect the asteroid and maybe make a space station out of it or something.
And let's not forget about one thing, the economics of asteroid mining. I've been reading, and many people out there probably listening in Radio Land here, that if somebody were able to mine particular asteroids, tug them closer or do something, we could have the first trillionaires with collective wealth well beyond that of Elon Musk. So in other words, on a serious side, there could be a future in these minerals and very rare earths that are out there in space to be mined, right?
And the asteroids that are making the closest approaches are the ones that would be easiest to bring into orbit around the Earth.
Wow.
To maybe make a space station out of, or use them as the source of the material you use to make a space station. Instead of having to lift all that material off the Earth, that would be way more expensive, because you'd have to launch these huge rockets with lots of material up into space to make up those things. So the only advantage, of course, is that you have a place on Earth where you can build things like that. We'll have to be able to build things out of the material out in space, which I'm sure.
Well, this is what I'm going to do, Jim, not to cut you short. I'm going to send a note, and many people should, to President Trump to appoint you as the Minister of Asteroid Mining Technology. That would be awesome. So you could be our go-to guru on that. And I'm trying to be serious, because wouldn't that be awesome to have that title, to be able to actually produce something? Because many people listening may think, the whole space program is just a big waste of money. And, we've been to the moon, and some people don't even believe we've been to the moon. I talked to a couple last week, and they were telling me that the Earth is very flat. And they showed me a picture of the lunar eclipse. And I said, well, how did you take that? And instead of seeing that the moon turned red, they showed this flat line across the entire moon. And I said, that's photoshopped, and they didn't admit it. But just trying to be a little humorous here. But don't forget, folks, we haven't lost you as far as if we have the opportunity, we'll do everything we can to make that opportunity if you're holding on the line. But to the top of the hour, if you'd like to ask Jim Scotty, the astronomer, some questions, that number, hopefully you memorize it by now or will, 1-800-848-9222. So, Jim, this is fascinating. I mean, so actively, you're up at the mountaintop 6 nights a month, or 6 nights, how do we describe that? Usually on that kind of schedule, detecting and searching for these objects.
Yeah, we sort of work in lunations rather than months, which are sort of close to what defined what the month was anyway, how long it takes the moon to go around the Earth.
Well, that's a good thing, Jim.
We prefer to observe when the moon is not in the sky, although we do also observe when the moon is bright in the sky. So The telescope time is easier to get back when the moon is full. So you can't see as faint an object, but you can still observe a lot of asteroids in that case. But yeah, anyway.
Well, Jim, you're awesome, and I'm telling you, there's so much to talk about in so little time, but we're up against a break here. And when we come back, ladies and gentlemen, more with our very special guest, astronomer Jim Scotty. Hope he'll join us in many iterations of this particular radio show that's now in its second week, moving through time and space, the Dr. Sky Experience. Tell your friends about this, and I'm sure many out there have questions. If you're still on the line, we'll do our very best to get to you before the very top of the hour. We'll be right back after these important announcements here on this radio station, 77 WABC.
This is the Dr. Sky Experience. Always look to the sky. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
46 minutes after the hour. Thank you for joining us on your evening or morning, wherever you're listening to us here. Heard on, 173 countries in all 50 states, and I'm even sure out into the cosmos. But, ladies and gentlemen, a famous comet discoverer named David Levy, who I know our special guest knows very well, made a comment about comets, which are these other objects that streak through the universe. And his quote goes like this: "Comets and cats are very much alike. Why? Because they both have tails, and they do exactly what they want." Our special guest, Jim Scotty, continues to join us to the top of the hour. Jim, it's fascinating to talk about this here. I mean, you're also involved in the study of comets. So give us a better explanation of what comets are as opposed to what asteroids are as we continue here.
Yeah, to me, I look at comets and asteroids as part of the same sort of group of objects. The only difference really is what they're made of and where they've been since they were formed in the early part of the solar system, most likely. So comets are asteroid-like objects which have volatiles in them, like water, ice water, actually, in that case, or other ices that have stayed on the object. And when a comet is far out, say Halley's Comet right now is near aphelion,
right.
It takes 76 years to get around the sun, and I think some of your viewers will remember its last visit.
Yes.
I still do.
I remember we were up
right
for the New York audience. Well, Jim, sorry to cut you short. We were up in High Point, New Jersey, back when Comet Halley was around. And we kept doing this public relations thing, and we got this is no exaggeration, 5,000 people showed up. It was like some kind of a revival, like a mini rock concert without the music. I wish we had the music. But it's an infectious thing, right? Comets are just so amazing. Yeah. But I want to try to squeeze in as many phone calls as we can, and I don't like the word squeeze. I wish we had 100,000 hours. Let's go to Doug in Brooklyn. He's been holding on. He wants to talk about what? An exploding planet? Is that what I'm hearing? Good morning.
Yeah, hi. I heard about that the asteroid belt. It seems to make sense to me. Was really not debris left over from the formation of the solar system, but really a planet that exploded. And I was just wondering what you thought about that.
Jim, great question. What say you?
Well, I wouldn't think that it would be a planet that exploded so much as, because there's so many asteroids and comets out there, it would be a planet that did not accrete to form into a planet. There are collisions, though, out in the asteroid belt and elsewhere that would break maybe a small, maybe asteroidal object. I can imagine something like Ceres, if it were run into by one of the other large asteroids, you could end up with probably the original Ceres would still probably be there, but there'd be a lot of debris around it that would become part of the asteroid belt and probably run into other asteroids. And it's a fairly complicated and busy place out there. Especially thinking in terms of the age of the solar system, how many different things probably have happened over the age of the solar system since the planets formed. Those were all formed by impacts with other objects falling into them. The moon is out there because probably Earth was probably maybe half or 2/3 or 3/4 the size it is today, and a Mars-sized object hit it. And the debris accreted into the moon and whatever was left of the Earth as well became the Earth that we see today in the long run. So it's interesting to think about how we came to be, how our solar system came to be, all the different kinds of events that would have happened over the 4.5 billion years that things have been here. And I'm interested also in looking at other star systems to imagine what kinds of things might have happened here a long time ago that we might see similar types of events out in the universe above our head here. So
thank you, Doug, for your call. We appreciate it. And I want to move forward. Excuse me, Jim, for jumping all over that. But I want to talk with Brian in Maine. The power of the radio station, 77 WABC. We're going all over the country and, of course, all over the world. Brian, good morning. You have a comment or question on Voyager 2, if I'm correct.
Yes, good morning, Dr. Sky. Good morning, Jim. And this isn't terrestrial. I am streaming you right now. But
okay. It's a nice plug for the radio station, though, right? There you go.
It sure is.
Both ways.
I am really amazed by Voyager 2, and given it's where it is right now, that we're still collecting data from that. And I'm just curious, what kind of data is that sending back? Whereas I understand it's what they call interstellar space now.
And it is. Voyager 1. Actually, Voyager 1 we're talking about, right? And both of them. But, Jim, go ahead. See you take that one.
Well, I still sort of look at the Voyagers. They're still, they're leaving our solar system, but they're really not very far away from our sun compared to where the other stars are. They've got a long trip ahead of them that, of course, they'll be long gone by then, or frozen, or batteries, or everything will have stopped working by then. But it's really interesting to see what it can still tell us about the area that it's in. And I think that's a very useful sort of thing. It did a really good job of flying past Jupiter and Saturn and Uranus and all that. And I think anything else we can get out of them is really pretty fun to pay attention to and learn about. So,
well, Brian, I appreciate your call here to the radio show and do appreciate your time with us today. Hope you'll be part of our continuance here talking about these great subject matters. Trying to squeeze as many callers as we can in because obviously the callers rule here on this particular show. Let's say good morning to Karen in Brooklyn if you're with us. You have some commentary about gravitation, is that correct?
Yes, I believe that water molecules gravitate towards each other, and I believe that's the missing link for getting it gravity.
Wow.
I don't know. But it's
that's
hard
amazing.
to believe that the Earth is spinning at 1,400 whatever miles a second or minute or whatever it is.
Yes.
We're tailored to this Earth. You know that, right?
You're so
we don't feel it. And
it's funny.
That's round is spinning.
The whole thing's in motion.
I just have one question.
Go ahead.
How much water is there on Uranus?
Well, that's a good
Earth?
question.
Because
and you know something, Karen? I'm always honest.
Compared to Earth.
Okay, well, I'm always honest here, and that's the only way to be a good host here. At least be respectful and humble, too. I don't know the answer to that, and I don't even know if Jim does, but Jim, the percentage of water on Uranus compared to that of the Earth. Great commentary, great question, but stay with us for a moment. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to give a very specific answer, but Uranus is a much bigger planet than the Earth is, and it apparently does have a lot of water, probably in the form of ice, on its surface and on the moons that orbit around it and all of that stuff. The water ice, there's a lot more of it out in the distant part of the solar system and beyond where it can remain. The planets closer to the sun boils the water off. We're just outside the area where that would happen, so we can actually go swimming in our oceans. And if you were on Venus, you might have some water in the upper atmosphere, but most of it got boiled off of the surface. It's so hot.
Well, that's amazing, Jim, that answer, because let me say this much. This is so cool because, Karen, I can tell you this, just a salute to Jim, like a discoverer of asteroids. Uranus was discovered by William Herschel, March 13, 1781, and that's a heck of a long time ago for an object that's way out there in the cold. But the biggest question and probability and thing of confusing about gravity is, when I was in school, we did a video and a little documentary with Dr. Kip Thorne, and I know Jim knows him, the gravitation guy with the Nobel Prizes on black holes. So I brought my book with me, which was Gravitation. And I looked at him while we're doing the video, Karen, and and Jim, we did this documentary. So I asked him, I said, would you sign the book? And he goes, well, wait a minute. What grade did you get in the Gravitation? It's about the size of a White Pages of New York or Los Angeles of years ago. And I told him I got a C+. And he said, why did you get a C+? And I'm honest. I said, I don't understand gravity. He goes, why'd you want me to sign it? I said, I use it as a step stool so kids can stand on it when they're getting closer to the heavens looking through the telescope. I thought that was cute, Karen. And that's a salute to Jim with Discoveries. So what say you, Karen? The last word. Go ahead.
I wish they would put Pluto back as a planet.
Oh, you and I, Jim. Yeah, I love this young lady because that's amazing. Yeah, he was a professor I had in college back in New Mexico State, and we had a family relationship with him. My mom and my family would go visit him all the time, and I'm sure his ashes are turning, right, Jim, in the space probe. Turn me back to
they're
a
out
planet.
there. Yeah, I
sent you an email, Dr. Sky, and I don't think you ever read it. So I just really quickly, I just think that water, once it goes somewhere else, other molecules will follow it. I just have this feeling. It's just, and that's part of gravity that nobody's counting. And you said you don't understand, and nobody understands. If you factor that in some way that I don't understand,
Well, God bless you for calling, and I hope we've tried to answer some of your questions, but a big shout-out and a thank you as we close the show in a few minutes for the first hour. Stay tuned for hour number 2, a whole different subject, talking about the Kennedy assassination and some other theories about this with a very special guest. But all of our guests are special, and especially our callers. We might have a minute or so to talk to Alec in Queens. We were talking about a meteorite question. Am I sorry if you're with us? Good morning.
Yes, I want to point out that about 450 years ago, Johannes Kepler attempted to set the motion of the planets and such of our solar system to a musical score. Now, the score fell short between Mars and Jupiter. He called it the discordant world. And he, even at some point in his work, he mentioned the fact that it could not maintain its stable existence. It would probably collapse, which is perhaps the genesis of these asteroids. My question, real quick to you, is that could considering this is probably your guest who could answer this maybe.
Yes, please go right ahead.
The question is that can we use the larger asteroids to kind of in the vernacular, to hop a ride on them to Mars or the outer parts of the solar system.
Alec, thank you for your question. We're running up against the clock. We'll be right back after these important commercial break.
Always look to the sky. The Dr. Sky Experience is on the air. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
The hour, welcome, folks, to hour number 2, as we continue to talk about not only the things that go above us, but things that have happened here on planet number 3 and great mysteries. Where were you on November the 22nd, 1963? I was 13 years of age, and a teacher came into the room, as I'm sure many of you who have lived that experience, to the horror and sudden tragedy, a cruel and brutal act, taking the life of President John F. Kennedy. We talk a little bit more, ladies and gentlemen, about Lee Harvey Oswald. For many people out there, including Vincent Bugliosi, a friend of mine for many years, the author of a book, Helter Skelter. He was the prosecutor in the Charles Manson case, and he wrote an amazing book, which was also as thick as the Gravitation book I described in hour number 1, called Reclaiming History. Mr. Bugliosi and I, we talked many times and had many interviews, and he insisted upon the day of his death, in his way, rightly so, for his privilege and his opinion, that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone assassin. Lee Harvey Oswald, born October the 19th, 1939, and shot, obviously, in the Texas basement of the Texas Police Department by Jack Ruby. 24 years of age, claimed that he was just a patsy. He bought and purchased a rifle, I should say, a Mannlicher Carcano rifle, a 6.5 caliber Italian rifle, in a mail-order situation for, I believe, some $25, under the name of Alec Heidel. Many names that he used. Who was this man? But more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, the mystery of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy continues to this day. We're hearing President Trump about to or has released many documents about what might hopefully end the discussion of this. But we believe strongly that that discussion will continue, and we appreciate the president in giving us new information. Also, I had the privilege and honor of knowing in person Secret Service agent Clint Hill, who, as many of you might remember, he's seen jumping on top of the limousine as the First Lady, Jackie Onassis, is crawling out of the car in a frantic moment. He also believed that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone assassin. But there are many other theories, and our very special guest, ladies and gentlemen, for the entire hour, I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy this gentleman. We've had him on shows I've done in the past. Author Todd C. Elliott, author of many books, many mysteries, murder mysteries and such, but in this particular case, a book entitled A Rose by Many Other Names, the story of a woman known as Rose Shirami. Who is he? He's a former AM radio talk show host, an author, a freelance writer with many books to his credit, and he comes to us with details about the Kennedy assassination mystery, and that's what this hour is about, a great mystery. Mr. Elliott, welcome to this particular show. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
This is incredible. I mean, we did this years ago, and I keep telling you, this book, people were just amazed. So set the stage for us. I mean, let's go back in time. This book is all about who? Tell us why you wrote it. Tell us the story behind it.
Sure. The reason I wrote it was because there's a huge, within the New Orleans metropolitan area, and I grew up in Louisiana my whole life, and I was amazed and fascinated by, one, the Kennedy assassination, and then the Louisiana connections to that unsolved killing. In my opinion, it's still unsolved, and it's still a mystery, but in a small town not far from where I grew up, some 48 hours before President Kennedy was murdered in Dallas, there was a woman who was thrown out of a moving vehicle in the small town of Eunice, Louisiana, where I was investigating for a magazine story that I was writing, just to see if there was anyone that might still recall anything. And, a lot of JFK authors told me that I would never have enough for a book on this one particular character. And the book is not a big book, but it's a big story. And I barely had enough for a book because a lot of people still, when I was investigating and interviewing, people were afraid to go on the record, even, almost 50 years later.
Exactly.
But the connections to Louisiana and the Kennedy assassination are, there's so many of them. They're quite numerous. I mean, Lee Harvey Oswald from Louisiana, lived in New Orleans, the first person to ever bring a trial forward in the murder of President Kennedy was District Attorney of Orleans Parish, Jim Garrison.
Yes.
And this woman in Eunice, Louisiana, now she wasn't from Eunice, Louisiana. Her real name was Melba Marcades, known as Rose Shirami, and she is depicted at the beginning of Oliver Stone's film JFK, where the first dramatized sequence of that film, they show a woman being thrown from a car.
I remember that, yes.
Yeah. And she was picked up by the local police and brought to a hospital where she started telling people that they were going to kill the president in Dallas. Mm-hmm. And again, this was about 48 hours before it actually happened. So this would have been Wednesday, and everyone thought she was crazy. She was a known prostitute, a drug addict as well. So, her validity, I guess, was in question. So they thought she was insane, and the state police took her away to put her in a mental facility in Louisiana here. But nobody thought she was crazy on Friday, November 22nd, 1963. And that's kind of where the story takes off, really. I mean, the movie JFK by Oliver Stone is, a great watch. It's if you've never been introduced to it, I think he based that on two different books, and I just wanted to add my book to the sort of brick in the wall, if you will, of so many books. And
you've done a good job. I mean, Todd, this is incredible because we had you. I mean, this is going back years ago, ladies and gentlemen, another lifetime for me. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know I sought you out, and I looked at this and I said, wow, because this came right off the heels, as I mentioned before at the top of the program. I hope you heard this. We had an opportunity to meet with Clint Hill, the Secret Service agent. He came to our place here in Arizona, and he was kind of very, well, God rest his soul. I know he recently passed on, but equally important, when we tried to press him on what he really thought about who was behind this assassination, he kind of like, clenched his fist and said, it was Oswald. That was it. And I was like, wow. I mean, okay, that was his opinion. But your book, I think, is so fascinating, and people should get this. The title of the book, A Rose by Many Other Names, as we're talking about the story of Rose Cherami.
Yeah.
It goes on. I mean, what got you motivated to want to write this? I mean, go into that a little bit, because this is different.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a different thing. And many people, all due respect to you, might look at this and say, if you started to talk about it over coffee and say, hey, I'm going to write a book about a woman who was a known prostitute and a drug addict, many people would say, well, that's kind of ridiculous. But give us the motivation. This is powerful stuff here.
Well, the motivation was, it was one summer, and I was incredibly bored, and boredom is a great motivator, I will tell you that. And
it's an honest answer, right?
Just driving to a small town, I started going every weekend, and just putting my feelers out for anyone that might know about this historical fact that places a small town in the sights of, a JFK conspiracy theorist. Now, as a JFK conspiracy theorist, this woman, Rose Cherami, who is known as Rose Cherami, is, in my opinion, the very first JFK conspiracy theorist, because she actually believed in a conspiracy to kill the president while he was still alive. She was the first person to ever voice this. So anybody that considers themselves a JFK conspiracy theorist, she's like, you could tie your lineage right back to Rose Cherami. However, nobody believed her. I found the story fascinating. I like unearthing, rare history and little known history and facts. It's a rabbit hole that you go down, and I do know this, though, that I will never, ever try to write another JFK assassination book in my life, because everybody has a theory, and everybody's theory is right.
Well, yes, and let me jump in here, as this is important, because I'm sure everybody listening right now, you have your own theories, and, I'm just reading off the web as we get our information mostly here, obviously. So many people are either disappointed about the new revelations that are coming out. We're going to get into that with you in greater detail. Yeah. And some are just so exasperated that, oh, wow, it's about time we're going to hear the truth on this. But again, the caller's rule in this particular story as we move on in the morning here. So I want to make the number available, 1-800-848-9222. That's 1-800-848-9222. And you'll be speaking with and asking your questions or comments from our gentleman who's our guest, Todd C. Elliott, this interesting book. But before we do open those lines, this is what I want to get from you. The whole story about Oswald. I mean, talk to us before we get into Rose and why and some of the things that make sense here in your book. What about that guy? I mean, I've read so many books about him. I've even had, hey, how about this? Did you know of the guy Jim Marrs, by the way? The author?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
What an amazing guy.
Jim Marrs, yeah.
God bless. He'd be on the show all the time, and he'd be telling me things like, in his Texas drawl, Steve, I'll tell you that damn story about, there's a lot of things covered up here. But tell us about what's your experience in investigating Lee Harvey Oswald, this enigma. This is a strange kind of guy with very many faces.
Well, he had links to the criminal underworld, which would have been organized crime, just like Rose Cherami. Rose Cherami claimed to know him as well as him and Jack Ruby, and claimed that now in the book, she claims that they were lovers, and it wasn't the first time that there was allegations that Oswald was a homosexual. But the most amazing thing about Oswald is he's still an enigma today.
Yeah.
For example, I don't know how a U.S. Marine defected to Russia, was observed by the KGB, married a Russian woman who her father just happened to be a Russian general.
Correct.
And as soon as he gets to Russia, the U-2 spy plane is shot down. Gary Powers, the pilot, was taken prisoner. Now, Oswald wasn't an idiot. I don't think he was a great shot, but I don't think he was an idiot at all. I mean, he studied and worked radar in Japan, and but as soon as he defects to Russia, they hit a plane that was almost undetectable at the time. The U-2 spy plane getting shot down coincides with his visit to Russia. Now,
amazing. Right.
He's also allowed to come back to the United States after defecting, and with a Russian bride. Not too many people could do that today, but not too many people could have done it in 1961 or 1962. Mm-hmm. And from there, he doesn't work a lot of jobs. He kind of works odd jobs. But he somehow has money, and his tax records are still unavailable to the public to this very day.
And he was listed as a sharpshooter in the Marine Corps, but I got to jump in with this before we go to callers here. This is interesting. I bought a Mannlicher Carcano. I have a firearm training background, law enforcement too. Okay. And many people may feel, wait a minute, does Dr. Sky has that? Well, that's another story. But I bought a Mannlicher Carcano in the 6.5 caliber. And I visited California, and I went to one of these dealers out there, which I won't name. Is near one of the big, old movie studios in the Los Angeles area. So I go in the store, and I see on the counter, get your very own, Lee Harvey Oswald scope that he used on the Mannlicher Carcano. And I asked the guy, I said, isn't that really the thing? He goes, yeah, he bought it from us, mail order, years ago. So I bought one, wow. had a gunsmith drill and tap the thing, and we went out to shoot it. And our expertise in shooting, we have different levels. So we took these flour sacks and set them up to the distances, and we're talking what? The alleged shooting distance from the 6th floor of the Texas School Depository is what, about 265 feet? Maybe not even that long. And that was the sloppiest rifle that I ever had in my hands, meaning no matter how hard I tried to center it, it was all over the place. So the point is, who is this Lee Harvey Oswald? He's a sharpshooter with a rifle that he bought for what, $20-some, mail order in those days? It's amazing.
Right, yeah, and he was in Texas when he bought the rifle. He could have gone to any store in Texas and purchased it.
Right, under the name of Alec Heidel. Right, that's not
Right, and here's the thing. In April of 1963, 7 months before Kennedy was assassinated, now the Warren Commission concluded this, and I've written 3 works of fiction, but the Warren Commission is also, their report is also a work of fiction. But they concluded that Oswald made an assassination attempt on an Army Major General Edwin Walker, and so they concluded that the attempt on the life of Major General in Dallas, Walker, was in his home sitting in a chair, and from a distance of 100 feet, there was a shot fired, but it didn't kill a sitting man. So you're telling me if it was Oswald,
what kind of a shooter is he?
Yeah, he couldn't kill a guy sitting in his living room from 100 feet. How could he hit a moving target that was, if you remember, a target that was getting smaller as it traveled further away from the Texas School Book Depository, which also didn't make sense. If Oswald was on the 5th floor of the School Book Depository, he would have shot Kennedy as he approached up Houston Street, whereas the target, he would have had a frontal shot, and the target would have been getting larger in his scope. The scope also was defective. They found that out later.
Interesting.
And, so Oswald, I do believe, was some sort of maybe a double agent, maybe a liaison between the organized crime and the CIA, or he was working for the FBI. But the story, now I've been told many things, that he was supposed to be some operative that day, and they were trying to encourage President Kennedy to ride in his limousine with the bubble top, the protective top, and that this was going to be a drill, and that Oswald, given orders, would have played along. But remember, what was Oswald? Who was Oswald? His words, I think, sum it up best. He says, "I'm just a patsy."
Exactly. Now, the most prolific words probably of that entire period in time between November 22nd and the time he was shot fatally in the basement of the Dallas Police Department. I'm just a patsy. You know what? Let's do this, Todd. Let's see if we can go to some of the callers here, because the callers rule here. Let's say good morning. If Pete's with us in New Jersey, you have a comment or question about this whole assassination thing and the mystery that still exists. Go ahead.
Your guess was right. Lee Harvey Oswald was a double agent. Okay. That's according to Roger Stone's book. Now, Roger Stone, his book is The Man Who Killed Kennedy. Now, I forgot. I lost the paper. I forgot to write the name down of the fingerprints around. He named the person had fingerprints. How can Lee Harvey Oswald kill somebody when he doesn't have cutter marks on his hands or his clothes?
Exactly.
It's not to kill anybody.
Right. It's the same. This goes out.
That's wrong.
No, gentlemen, this goes out to anybody who's a shooter out there doing it responsibly and legally. I once came to an airport when I was doing some training, and I washed my hands as best as I could. And sure enough, right through when you go through TSA, they actually detected some of that on my hand. So you're right. where's the powder burns on Lee Harvey Oswald's hand, the whole comment. But Pete, you're so right. But any other question to our guest? Because we really haven't gotten into Rose yet and her, relationship and what's going on here. We'll be getting to that shortly. Any final comment you have or question, Pete?
In Myra Stone's book, John Kennedy, Herman Kennedy hired Abraham Bolden. He was the first black Secret Service agent. He wasn't assigned to Kennedy's assassination, but they framed him because he suspected that the report was a fictional, like you say. Now he's in his 90s now. He has his lawyer's name is Tyler Nixon, and he was framed for a minor thing. He get 4 or 5 years in prison. He told me that President Trump knows about it. He wants the conviction. This lawyer wants his conviction vacated because he was framed. They lied about it. They lied about it and perjury, and it was a crooked. It was just like with what would happen with at Butler. The body with the whole thing messed up.
Well, Pete, we're going to run out of time on this, but no, I appreciate your call here because this is very important. The whole point of this hour here on this particular radio show is to talk about mysteries, and we couldn't find, and we have obviously the best guest in class here, Todd C. Elliott, with his book.
Thank you.
Pete, I appreciate you calling us. I hope you'll join us in future iterations of our show, The Dr. Sky Experience. Before we set the stage here, we got to get into this, for the rest of the callers, for the rest of the program. But let's now entertain the conversation about who Rose Cheramy was. I mean, there's a lot more here that your book goes into. And obviously, let's ask the simple question. How do people get a copy of your book? Because in the short time we have in any interview, we can never do justice to the whole story.
Right. Yeah. Well, it turns out that she was probably a double agent, too. She definitely was a FBI informant at some point. Who she was reporting to, unknown. She's a bit of a mystery, but her ties link to the New Orleans organized crime, and that would have been Carlos Marcello and his crime family out of New Orleans, which was very much operating in small towns, cat houses, and places like that back in the day. Known prostitute, known drug runner, drug addict, too, by the way. But again, she was the first person to speak the truth about the assassination and predicted it. I don't know if she was a clairvoyant, but I think she, just being in the right circumstances, right place, the right time for her, she overheard some things, probably something she wasn't supposed to. And she was allegedly traveling with the men in a vehicle who were on their way to Dallas to kill the president on Friday. She must have said something or other. They ejected her from the vehicle. She was left behind and told people in Eunice, Louisiana, that this was going to happen. And as soon as it did happen, Louisiana State Police promptly escorted her out of the hospital, the Jackson State Hospital, for the women's facility. They took her out of the state, and they basically kind of deported her to Texas. And the things that she told people in Eunice, Louisiana, and the state troopers at the time led them to question a lot of things. And the state trooper was very much instrumental in trying to go back years later when Jim Garrison was very interested in Rose Cheramy. In fact, had files on her, dating back to even in the days of the OSS, which was pre-CIA days.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So a person who lacks that credibility, and I'm not here to judge somebody, I didn't know her, but from your excellence in reporting and journalism, she was a known prostitute. She was obviously, addicted to drugs. And, well, it's sad that people are, if they're in that profession, if they choose to do that. But that lends to what? Less credibility when you're making a story and a statement that you know more about this experience of the president being shot. And that's a whole story that you're talking about here is very interesting.
It is, exactly. I found it very interesting, and I still think the book is an interesting read if no one has ever read it. You can definitely get it through Amazon. That's the best place to order it. Somehow Amazon makes more money off my book than I do, but hey, that's neither here nor there.
I hear that. I hear that from a lot of authors. But let me ask you this question. Give us the official title, if I didn't do proper justice to the title, give us the official title.
Yeah, it is a Rose by many other names, Rose Cheramy and the JFK assassination.
Okay, I wanted to get that right and get that out.
It's through Trine Day Publishing out of Walterville, Oregon. And you can visit trineday.com and order it from there. But yeah, it's still a great mystery. And, it's one of those, she's one of those footnotes, unfortunately. She's one of those unfortunates who was found dead, by, strange circumstances. And, she was, and Oliver Stone did a great job at depicting, the short time that we are introduced to her, with her being thrown out of a car, talking about they're going to kill the president on Friday. And then at her demise, where she's found dead in the mid 60s, several years after, the assassination, she's found dead on the side of a highway in Texas. And a lot of people say that the eyewitnesses that were there, it looked like her luggage was staged on the side of the highway around a curb.
Wow.
So that she was in a line. They lined up her suitcases to veer to the right of the road where her head was laying on the side of the highway.
Oh my
and
gosh.
It
That's
was
horrible.
meant to look like some sort of accident, and that there's a lot of that with a lot of folks that were witnesses or just by circumstantial evidence tied to the Kennedy assassination.
Interesting. Folks, we have another half hour to go to the top of the hour, and we want you to be part of our conversation. The number here, 1-800-848-9222. That's 1-800-848-WABC, a radio station that I'm sure you hear and very proud to report the same thing. Heard in 173 countries, all 50 states, and obviously, as I say, beamed out into the cosmos, and who knows, as Larry Kudlow would say, all the way out to the Milky Way and maybe even beyond. But ladies and gentlemen, we're coming up on that hard break at the bottom of the hour. Our special guest, in case you're just tuning in, much more to come with author Todd C. Elliott, Rose by many other names, and the rest of the mystery of the Kennedy assassination, a story that will not go away. And we wonder out there, do you really think, seriously, that we'll ever get the answer to this? The simple answer response back is probably not, but let's never give up hope. And as one of the great poets, Dylan Thomas once said, as we talk about on this program, and I quote, "Do not go gentle into that good night." What does that mean? Rage against the dying of the light to continue to save our species, one program at a time, as we try to open up everybody's minds on subjects that you probably don't normally hear about, and I know you have an interest. We'll be right back after these important commercial break.
This is the Dr. Sky Experience. Always look to the sky. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
43 minutes after the hour, thank you for joining us here on the Dr. Sky Experience. Heard Eastern Daylight Time, midnight to 2 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and to all of you around the nation and around the world, we wish you the best for the upcoming day. As we move into spring, the vernal equinox just a day or so ago, the Latin word for this particular season, vernal, simply means in Latin, spring. And we wish each and every one of you the peace and tranquility and hopefully the ability to thaw out for many of our friends and listeners around the country, around the nation, and around the world that want to see the light of the sun to warm ourselves up for brighter days to come. Our special guest is Todd C. Elliott. Interesting. A book, A Rose by many other names. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy, and talking with a particular person who that book is about, Rose Cheramy, thinking about the assassination, simply a cruel and despicable act, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Todd, welcome back. Lots to talk about, and I think what we want to do first, and due respect to our callers out there, let's see if we can say good morning, of course, to Christine in New York City. Good morning, Christine. Are you with us?
Yes, I am. And hello, Dr. Sky. You're one of my favorite people.
Oh, thank you.
But what I wanted to say about the Kennedy assassination is that I've seen evidence it was impossible for anybody to shoot at Kennedy at that time from the designated window in the school book depository because of a tree that grew. It's a Texas oak or something like that, and it was in full leaf. And they showed the trajectory from the window to what had been the president's head, and that it was solidly blocked. You could not see it. You could not aim anything through there.
Yes,
so that
right.
gets rid of the... Thank you.
Well, I was up there, Christine. I visited this, and I know, Todd, I'm sure you've been there to the Texas School Book Depository, where they have the 6th floor museum. It's a very interesting place. But going back, Christine, as you're listening off air, I imagine, we had the experience I was sharing earlier. I hope you heard it. I actually had that same rifle, not the exact one that was used, sadly, in the assassination, but a copy of it. A very, how do I say this, a very poorly manufactured gun because they were replicated in World War II. And many may take offense to that and say, well, the Malica Carcano was a great rifle. But our experiences in shooting it at those alleged distances, as you're corroborating, from the 6th floor with a full, blooming tree, a very difficult thing. And Todd, this is interesting. I'm sure you've been to the location at Dealey Plaza. Isn't that, and my opinion of that is not as important as yours, but it just reminded me as if it was like a small movie set. I mean, have you been there? I'm sure you visited there a number of times. Describe it to people who've never been there. It's weird. It's like a strange place.
It is. It's a very powerful place considering what happened there, and it's perfectly set up for a crossfire, which I never bought the lone gunman theory. Remember, you also have reports of smoke coming from the grassy knoll area.
Right.
You also have the president's brain being blown out the back of his head, which would indicate a shooter from the front. I mean, I don't know about you, and I don't know a lot about physics and things like that, but, you mentioned Clint Hill and how he was saying that Jackie was trying to run out of the car. She wasn't. She was actually trying to retrieve a piece of the president's skull and brain.
I wanted you to say that, and again, I didn't want to mislead the audience. It's just that from Clint Hill's description, you're absolutely spot on. I asked him that question, and he said, sadly, with a little more detail, that's what she was going after. And it's so horrible. But let's talk just for the audience ballistics here for a second. A 6.5 caliber, bullet is probably not even as powerful for the listeners out there that may know the 308 platform, which is fairly powerful, 7.62 by 51 in millimeters. But even it's even alleged that this was probably something as simple as a .223 caliber cartridge, which was like that of an AR-15. Now this gets even more bizarre, and I want to know if you've heard this because maybe listeners have.
Right.
On the railroad tracks. I know
where you're going.
No, on the railroad tracks at the same time, there was some story that came out, and I don't know how true this is, but here we go. 3 hobos, that's a very discriminatory term, I'm sure, but that's what they called it.
Right.
Were allegedly stopped on the tracks after the assassination. And some have reported to say that these 3 individuals were E. Howard Hunt, Eugenio Martinez, and Frank Sturgis. Who are those guys?
Yeah.
They're the same guys that were at the Watergate burglary. And I once spoke with the daughter of E. Howard Hunt in a long, long time ago in a galaxy far away. When I was back in New Jersey, there was a re-election campaign for President Nixon, and his brother came there. And sitting next to me was his daughter. You ever hear that, or am I just like off into twilight?
Oh, no. Yeah, and District Attorney Jim Garrison was very interested. Never thought that these men resembled homeless hobos or whatever. They were clean-cut. They were wearing nice clothes. In fact, Woody Harrelson's father was also reportedly one of the men, one of the hobos that were taken off the train. He was under a lot of scrutiny and investigation.
Wow. That's a revelation.
For killing a judge in Texas. Yeah. And so there was, of course, another theory that, and they came out with this a couple of years ago, that one of the Secret Service guys accidentally shot the president with I think he had an M16 on him. And
I've heard
to
that.
me, I've heard that. And to me, it's kind of a way of like saying that the government's saying, well, we did kill the president, but it was an accident. And I never bought it. And again, you go back to Lee Harvey Oswald, and I actually do believe that there were probably 4 active shooters that day. because this was a plan put in place by the CIA using the mechanics, which were organized crime members and sharpshooters. And the only reason I'm saying this is because they had this blueprint already to kill Castro. And it's my theory that the CIA, working with the mafia, because even where I'm from right now, I'm North Shore of New Orleans, that's where they trained Cuban exiles and refugees for the Bay of Pigs invasion. Now, I think the thing that really killed Kennedy was when he refused to give air cover for the Bay of Pigs invasion. And I think at that moment, when the Bay of Pigs failed and Kennedy did not provide the air coverage for that, I think that was the final straw. They were like, okay, let's take the plan we have to assassinate Castro, and let's just do it. Let's just take out Kennedy. And with some of the new documents that have come out now, most of them, there's nothing really new there, and there's never ever going to be a smoking gun.
That's what I wanted to hear. What the president has released. You're telling us that there's a lot of that redacted.
Yeah, a lot of it was already released under the Biden administration, and it's more redacted than it's ever been. So I
didn't know that.
So a lot of still more redacted stuff, which I thought that the whole point of full disclosure was not having the redacted stuff. But you're never going to have a smoking gun, and that's the problem. And I believe the shooters, whoever pulled the trigger, and I do believe it was probably 3 or 4 operatives, they're long dead, probably. But there may be some incriminating evidence linked to some political families that may still be around, and I'm not going to name any names, but as far as Oswald being the way they painted him, a rabid communist, who assassinated the president. Okay, let's say this 20-something-year-old guy, he's got the world's attention. He's got cameras on him. And does he say, as a rabid, proud communist, I killed the leader of the free world? No, he says, I'm just a patsy. Exactly. And I'm actually shocked at how much they let Oswald say to the media at the time. No, the term patsy means there's 2 or more other people involved.
And the strangest part is you find out later, obviously fast forwarding here, that that Jack Ruby, of course, with his little Colt Agent 38 special, how the heck does he get into the basement without being stopped? Well, it's amazing. And all of a sudden, right to the gut goes the shot.
Right. And and if you watch that footage, and I think you probably witnessed it live on television, a lot of Americans did back then. I think it was a setup. I think it was planned. Another interesting theory was, if you look at Oswald in all these photos, he was brought in wearing a white T-shirt. You'll see that he had the white shirt on several times throughout the questioning, and all the footage is still out there. Again, he said a lot to the cameras. I was actually amazed that today you wouldn't be able to, a guy brought in like that would not be able to say as much as Oswald did. And,
it is strange.
I think it was interesting that they put him, as he was about to be assassinated, they put a black long sleeve sweater on Oswald because I believe that they knew that he was going to be killed on live television. And it might have been too gruesome for American audiences to actually see blood. And if he was wearing a black sweater, there would be no blood.
But you know what? We're coming up here on our next break. Not to cut you short, I appreciate what you're doing here with us, Todd. And let's say this, ladies and gentlemen. When we come back from this particular break, I know you're listening because you want to know more about Rose Shirley, and we'll have Todd explain this. But still time to get in on the conversation. 1-800-848-9222. That's 1-800-848-9222. It's kind of fascinating to hear about this. And I don't know, ever since I was a child, I remember seeing this as a young boy, and the students in the classroom, like all people all over the world, wherever they were at the time. I was in a Catholic school in New York, and the nuns came in, the principal, and she was like, the president was shot. And how do you handle that when you're such a young child and adults crying? I mean, such a sad, like I said, a cruel and despicable act, which is actually the name of another book that I'm sure you've seen out there on the Kennedy assassination, among others. But, Todd, we're coming up on that break, and we'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen, as you're listening to me, Steve Cates, Dr. Sky. The Dr. Sky Experience continues where? Here on 77 WABC.
This is the Dr. Sky Experience. Always look to the sky. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
46 minutes after the hour, racing to the top of the hour. Still time to take your calls and questions, as many as we can get in. Our special guest is Todd C. Elliott. The book, A Rose by Many Other Names, a story about Rose Cherami. Let's say good morning to Terrence in Bayside. Good morning. How are you?
Gentlemen, this is a Hall of Fame show. Now, it's November 22nd, 1963, 64. I walk into the room during the autopsy of JFK, and the first thing I say is, why isn't JFK's head shaven? Why isn't his hair shaved off? He has massive head wounds. That covers wounds and everything, and you can play with the scalp. Now, there were shooters in the front and the back. Now, if you watch the video, this is important now, of Dr. Charles Crenshaw, emergency room in Parkland that day on 2020 with Hugh Dowse and Barbara Walters. And also there's tremendous videos with Dr. McLennan, who was also in there. They will describe the head wound on Kennedy. Massive head wound in the back. And Baxter goes, Dr. Crenshaw says, I took a second look just to take a look at that, just to see how devastating it was. Also, could I just say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
No shots from the side. Nobody ever says this. I just said it on Matt's show a couple of weeks ago. Because if you miss from the side, you hit Jackie Kennedy. Your chance of hitting the First Lady, unacceptable, 1963. Now, Jack Ruby, all right, we know the mob connections. We know Oswald's uncle is running numbers for the mob. But would the mob send somebody to shoot somebody on national TV? Because is it possible Oswald knew nothing, but they wanted to make it look like he knew something, or they wanted him silenced? Because let me tell you something. Jack Ruby knew a million people, not only just mob guys, and also Joe Kennedy, now the father of the president. That man made a lot of money. Everyone jokes there's 10 generations of Kennedys that haven't worked. This guy cleaned house when it came to making money. He had a lot of enemies.
Yes,
maybe one too many that day, maybe. And also Dr. Baxter, who was in the emergency room. There was about 10 doctors altogether. He was interviewed on 2020 with Hugh Dowse and Baba Wawa. And he said, he was the lead guy of all the surgeons, says, don't anybody try to make any money off this. Just keep it silent, whatever you know, whatever you say. But that night, Dr. Malcolm Perry gave the press conference, and he said, the wounds on the president's throat and the head looked like an entry wound, and the head looked like an exit wound.
Terrence, you bring up so many good things. I wish we had more time to hear this, and I hope someday when we do this again, and we will, let's go ahead and get Todd to respond, because this is so amazing. The mystery continues, and the cover-up continues.
Yeah, I think he was referring to the Malcolm Kilduff. If you Google the video, the YouTube video of Malcolm Kilduff making the announcement that the president had been shot, he points directly to his forehead. He points to his forehead because as he saw it, as he heard, there was a shot from the front. And remember the sort of mantra that Oliver Stone had and Jim Garrison had, back and to the left. Back and to the left. Now, back and to the left means there was a shooter from the front and to the right, which would have been the grassy knoll area where they reported seeing a puff of smoke. As far as Jack Ruby doing that, like you wouldn't think, well, would the mafia put this guy out there to do that? Jack Ruby already had cancer at that point. He was a walking dead man, and they all knew it. And that's why he didn't have any problems doing it. He did allude to conspiracy before he died. And now he also had connections to Carlos Marcello, Lee Harvey Oswald. Yeah,
what a mystery. I mean, it just goes on. It's amazing, Todd. But Terrence, thank you. I mean, obviously time doesn't permit for us to go into the deeper analysis, but you're a valued contributor here. Let's say hello to Dave and good morning to him in Pennsylvania if you're with us on the line on the Dr. Sky Experience. Go ahead.
Yes, I am. I just wanted to say that during the shooting, I believe that the first shot, because he went for his neck, I do believe that CIA agent that was in the car behind guarding the president maybe misfired and caused the first wound because he grabbed for his neck.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Well, yeah, I mean, still in a roundabout way, they're still saying, well, the CIA killed the president, but it was an accident. But according to all the doctors there was a small entry wound in the front, and you'll see President Kennedy in the Zapruder footage grab his throat because he got shot from the front. Now, they botched that because they claimed they had to do a tracheotomy, and they had to make an incision in his neck. That he didn't need a tracheotomy. His brains were blown out. And so that just didn't make any medical sense at all. Again, back and to the left. And so that means shot from the front and to the right. He was also shot in the back, they say, as well.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, it's as far as everything is concerned. Rose Cheramy kind of plays into this as a go-between between the criminal underworld and intelligence, because she was reporting to the FBI. She was an FBI informant, and
yes,
she also claimed that there was heroin involved, and there was a theory put out that the assassins themselves were not paid in cash, that they were paid in heroin, because their cash could be traceable with serial numbers and things like that. So it gets really interesting if it all goes back to Cuba. Then you have to ask yourself, and some of the new revelations that have come out, we do know for a fact the CIA the latest documents that have been released did definitely say that Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby met several times, and they knew one another, and that RFK, this is interesting because we kind of theorized that the Mafia and the CIA were working together, but in a CIA memo, Robert F. Kennedy expressed that he was concerned and did not want the CIA to work with the Mafia again. And so they knew this. Yeah. And
it's amazing stuff. I wish we had more time, and I hate to cut you off and cut anybody off, but Dave in Pennsylvania, thank you for your contribution here. But you know what? I owe you something, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I owe you another opportunity, gladly, to come back and talk about the rest of why Rose Cheramy is the subject of the book and the rest of her story. But I appreciate that. And how do they get in touch with you to get a copy of not only this book, but you've got a whole other series of books on what? How would you describe them? Murder mysteries? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, my second book is about the Axeman murders of 1912, which was actually the largest unsolved serial killing in U.S. history. And a lot of people know the Axeman murders from a popular TV show called American Horror Story, but that was actually just a copycat killer out of New Orleans. And those books are both available from TrineDay.com. Of course, you can look me up on Amazon, Todd C. Elliott, Elliott. But if you got my email address. If you wanted to give it out to the public, you could do that.
Well, I will do that, but unfortunately, I don't have it sitting in front of me. Shame on the host.
Right. Okay. Yeah, if you want to send me something, it's telliott.press @gmail. TELLIOTT.press PRESS @gmail.com. But yeah, I would love to get some feedback and some orders. That would be great. And
let's do this again. And Todd, let's do this again, because let me say this. Time doesn't permit a subject like this. We could do 24 hours and more and would still only be touching. And so many of the other great authors out there. I mean, I mentioned before, not to stand on a soapbox, but the relationship I had with Vincent Bugliosi, he was an excellent man to listen to. But he told me something interesting, a little much down the road here, since he's passed on. He said, when I actually wrote Reclaiming History, which is a book of 1,600 pages, it's almost like a giant white pages of the days gone by in big cities. He said he actually wrote that on legal paper. He hand wrote it, and his secretary transcribed everything in that book. But his consensus was that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone assassin, and I respect him highly in his research and his legal mind. Just an interesting man. So now today, folks, as you're listening, what's next? I mean, we hope that we get some answers. Sometimes, I'm not trying to sound naive, it may be something that we'll never get an answer to, but we will never stop, right, Todd? We'll continue to open up these mysteries for the many listeners of this particular radio show. As we talk far and wide, I mean, we're heard everywhere, and it's a privilege and honor to have you here on this. But one last comment that I'd like to make, or maybe put it into a question. Who do you really think was really behind what Jack Ruby? I mean, that guy was just so mysterious also. I heard a rumor that he died he thought he was injected with cancer cells. Is that what he said, or something like that?
for a rapid accelerant of cancer. He believed that, yeah, but he was already diagnosed with cancer. He's connected to, of course, the Chicago Mafia, which Chicago was actually supposed to be the first staging ground for Kennedy's assassination. You can Google that, but they later decided on Dallas, a city where they knew they had the police. They had Lyndon Johnson with his Texas connections. But the whole thing goes back to Cuba, and if you ask me, it was the CIA in conjunction with organized crime, mainly all over Cuba. And why? Because, well, the casino interests were run out by Castro, and the big corporate Pepsi Cola wanted the sugarcane fields down there, and the CIA were definitely involved with that. And I would even go so far as to say a lot of the media was part of the cover-up, and I believe FBI was involved in the cover-up because there's a fallout.
It's interesting. Like that. It's amazing. The mystery continues. But I remember the comedian Richard Belzer had a book, and we never got him on the air, but his book had a story about all the mysterious people, how they died, mysteriously, I should say, who witnessed the Kennedy assassination, and the story goes on. So again, Todd, thank you so much for being part of this radio experience here as we move through time and space. This is my honor to have you and all the other people that call in here. And if we didn't get to you folks at this particular time, we'll do this the very next time we bring on guests like this, which is simply 1 week away. What are we going to talk about in the future? Not to give you the name specific, but we're looking to get some very interesting people here, as always, in the world of ufology, UAPs, people who are obviously in the know about what's really going on with the drones. The unsatisfactory answer that the government still gives us, that it was nothing to be concerned about. Many people still have big concerns about that. And also, a good friend of ours, we're looking to see if we can schedule him. If you remember Billy Mumy from Lost in Space, we've had interviews with him. He's a friend, and we're looking to get him on here to talk about, as I mentioned, not only talking about astronomy, space, aviation, and weather, but, of course, stories of American exceptionalism. What makes America so great, and shall it always be great? As we talk about, as the main portion of this entire radio station talks about a theme, and we're so proud to be part of it, truth, justice, and the American way. And we're looking to get many musical guests on here and celebrities. But you're a celebrity, Todd, in my mind, and I want to thank you for joining us on this particular moment in time. Thank you, sir. We'll hopefully
Thank you for having me.
It's always a privilege and honor.
Today's episode is sponsored by NerdWallet's Smart Money Podcast. Making financial decisions shouldn't feel like picking a TV show. Too many options, too much hype, and no way to know what's actually good. NerdWallet's Smart Money Podcast cuts through the clutter. Their finance journalists break through real-world money decisions with clear research-backed insights. From investing to home buying to credit cards, the nerds help you navigate major financial decisions with confidence. Leave TV to fate. Leave your next financial move to the nerds. Follow NerdWallet's Smart Money Podcast wherever you listen.